Tell us where Claribel came from. How did you get that name?
When I was being expected, I suppose, my mother was reading in the San Antonio Express, in the newspaper. Anyway, she came across this name in the society section in the paper, and she hung that name on me.
Interesting.
Yes.
So just out of the society pages.
Yes. And then, of course, this is another story that goes with that. I was just telling Lindsay a while ago about Owen. He's into rocks. I got involved in the rock show locally, and because of my boss when I was working for them. Anyway, during our time I was with the rock show, or as a member, we had a trip over to Llano County where we went on a rock hunt. And so while we were there in this pasture, these two little ladies drove up. Dressed to the nines. And they were not dressed to go on a rock hunt. Anyway, while we all had taken our lunch along, and so while we were having our lunch, someone called my name. And so this little lady perks up, and she thought we were calling her. And she was Claribel. And she was from Kerrville. And she was Claribel Garassi from Kerrville.
Huh. Well, you mentioned your boss. Tell us, what was his name and where did you work?
It was a woman.
Oh, okay.
A woman attorney. That was Agnes Saugabiel, is who I worked for. And her sister was Edith Saugabiel, and she was in charge of the title company that I worked for.
Okay.
I worked in the office for both of them, but mainly in the title company, and that's where my work was.
Okay. What was the name of that title company?
Well, it was Saugabiel Abstract Company originally. And I said, when we first started out, if you remember or know where the bank down on the corner of Llano and Main is, well, that building upstairs is where the office was. And there was a stairway between that building and the next building that you walked up to get upstairs. And up there, we had a dark room, and they made copies of everything, all of the different books at the courthouse. And so anyway, we had a lot of that stuff in the office. And at one point, I was making, I don't know if you know what an abstract is for a property.
Tell us about
It is a copy of every instrument that has anything to do with a piece of property. I mean, it is a photographic copy of every instrument. Anyway, we would have to make a list of all of the different instruments and then go back, and I would have to make copies of all of those instruments, and then I would have to go ahead and develop the film. I would have to make the pictures and wash them and dry them, and then
wow.
and put everything together in a booklet. I mean, that was my work at that time. I mean, at that time, now abstracts at that time.
What year was that about?
I started in 1946, I guess, is where I started working for them. And of course, then we got married in 47, and I was still working for them at that point.
Okay.
But anyway, I would make these copies of these, or make an abstract. Later on, when you talk about title work, you ended up buying a title policy. I mean, that's what they do nowadays. You rarely ever hear about an abstract.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, then at that time, I would do that, and we had this wonderful machine that you could run all of the films on. You put a roll of film on there, and you could reel through and read all of your instruments. And when that wasn't the easiest thing in the world, but to run those films and then make copies of everything. I mean, it was quite a
very time consuming.
Yes, I mean, and you were in the dark room by yourself doing this.
So, is this any relation to the Artsagobios?
Yes.
Okay.
Except that that is a different branch.
Okay.
Of our different from our branch.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's go back. This is some of the stuff Dad wanted to know. What are some of your earliest memories growing up on Walsh Street?
Okay. I guess some of my earliest are just playing, I guess, in the yard, crawling into the big fig tree that we had in the backyard. And this was that fig tree was as large around as a house. It was big. It's not there anymore, but anyway, it was huge. And we used to pick figs forever. My mother made fig preserves, and I love them. I mean, that was one. And of course, we had chickens.
Okay.
And we took care of them. And it was just the ordinary, everyday things that you did. I mean, Mom had a garden, and we helped in the garden. There was all of the fruit, I mean, peach trees, and of course we had pecan trees. And like I say, she always had a huge garden on both sides of the house. And I said, and we had the one thing, my dad made these 3 beds through the garden where asparagus were growing. And anyway, he would take care of that every year. As soon as in the spring, when the asparagus came up, my mother would go out with a knife, and she would take that knife down into the ground and cut the asparagus off down below the ground. So they sell you white asparagus in the grocery store, but that's the way she had hers.
Okay.
That's a little extra deal that they have when they sell them, and they sell them for a price.
Just cutting a little deeper below ground.
Yes. And then they came up in the spring, and then they were gone after so long a time. Then the foliage would come up, the asparagus foliage. But then later on, Dad would cultivate that, fertilize it, and take care of it. And I said, I grew up eating asparagus, and I hated them. Nowadays, I love them.
Tastes do change.
Yeah.
So what year was that when y'all were living on Walt Street? Were you born there?
I was born there. I was born in 1928.
Okay.
And that house that later on, that is the one where Dr. Pete has his office now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they moved that house that I lived in around the corner up there on the street above.
Okay.
It's still there, and whoever has it now, I guess Pete, they have fixed it up. It looks a whole lot like it used to. But anyway, it originally was a 3-room house. It was one of these, 2 rooms, one, and then the folks had bought it, and then they added onto it, supposedly around the time I was born, that they finished it and made it into a 6-room house. It was 3 rooms that way, 3 rooms that way. There was a kitchen, dining room, living room on that side, and this side had 3 bedrooms. The bathroom was in between the kitchen and that back bedroom. And then there was this long hallway in the middle and a porch up in the front of that house. And that's basically around 28, I think, is when they built it, rebuilt it, yeah.
Okay.
Or remodeled it, I should say.
Well, did they live anywhere before that?
Well, yeah, originally my folks, but no, not before they had children, evidently,
Okay.
because at that time, over on Hackberry Street, there is a small house down in the next block from us that they lived in briefly after they married.
Okay.
But then later on, Dad was involved with the electric company. Okay, and where the old house is, there on the corner, there's all of that building that somebody has worked on. That was a gin. Okay, and in that gin building is where the electric company was originally, where they generated the electricity.
Oh my goodness!
It's across the street from that old property. And anyway, that property then, at that point, and that was why they ended up buying that property, because he was right by his work. And of course, I don't know if you know the whole story about the electric company or not, but I mean, that's a rather interesting.
Do tell.
That's a rather interesting story. I mean, I have it written up in.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, if you ever want to look at it that way. But he, at one point, they had a fire in that company, and he called my mother on the phone, and he told her, he said, our woes or all of our troubles are over with because everything had burned. And see, then after that, people had experienced electricity in town, and they were wanting some more of it. And so anyway, you know where the Stein Lumber Company, okay, that building that's over there across the road, it has a sign up across the top. It says, Citizens, Light, and Power. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, that building, and then these people in town got together and put up money to start an electric company. And they did. My dad was the manager. Mm. And anyway, when that particular thing was put in, that all started a whole another new process with the electric company. Because then, as time went on, they called it Citizens, Power, and Light because these citizens had put the money up. And then after that, it was sold to West Texas Utility Company. And then after that, it was sold to Central Power and Light. And from down in Corpus Christi. They owned it for a long time until the city bought it in the 40s. They bought the electric company. But Dad was always the manager, as long as they had it.
So that original plant there, they were actually generating electricity?
Yes.
How were they doing? Was it coal?
Well,
or?
Now how they actually generated it in the old gin building, I'm not sure.
Okay.
Over there in that building, now this is another thing I can tell you about my childhood. In that Citizens Power and Light Company building, he went to St. Louis to learn about diesel mechanics or motors. And they had some real huge diesel motors in that building. And when we were kids, Kenneth and I, my brother and I, on Sundays, Dad would go down and maintain everything. And he would take us along, and you went out there into that building, and there were ladders, and then there were like walkways on those diesel motors, and we could crawl up them and run along those.
I bet that was fun.
But anyway, that was part of the.
Okay. Well, you mentioned Kenneth.
Yes.
Can you tell us the names of your other brothers
Yes.
and sisters?
My oldest brother was Alton.
Okay.
Okay, and then my sister Marion was next, and then Louis was my next brother,
Okay.
and then I came. There were 5 of us
Okay.
in the family.
Excellent. Well, what memories do you have of them?
Well, a lot of memories. I mean, it
I know
was
that's very
just sort of all. I said, no, it's just like starting to school.
Mhm.
When I started to school, it's like I was saying this morning. We spoke German at home, and so I mean, of course, now Marion and Louis and Alton had already started to school before I did. So anyway, I had, of course, picked up from them, but we still. The German was the main language. Anyway, learning English was more after I started to school, and like you're supposed to. And anyway, like I say, I learned a lot from them as far as that in that regard. But anyway, as time went on, of course, they all started school and they went through high school and graduated. And then World War II came along. And of course, Alton left and went to California to work after he got out of high school. And then as time went on, he got into the service, and he was in the air. Where they do the parachuting, what do they call it?
The paratroopers?
Paratroopers. He got into the paratroopers down in Florida. But then he did go overseas. And same thing with, well, of course, Marion, she graduated. She went on and she started working for the county clerk's office. And that's how come I managed to get into with the Saga Bills.
Okay.
I mean, it was through that I managed to get into that. But anyway, she worked there until she married, and she got married in 46, I guess, 46. And but anyway, then Louis, he graduated, or I don't know whether he totally finished. He may have quit high school and joined the Marine Corps. And he went overseas, and he served in the South Pacific, same place Wally did.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Going back to school, where was the school at the time, and was that just, kindergarten through 12th grade? Or?
Yeah, it was 1st through 12th. There was no kindergarten. If there was a kindergarten, it was a private thing. I never went to kindergarten, no. But I started 1st grade when I just barely turned 6. Since I'm talking about birthday, July 31st. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I barely turned 6 when I started to school. And I'll never forget the first day we started. We walked to school. We didn't drive. We always had to walk from where we lived all the way across to where the old high school is. Okay.
The current middle school?
I started first primary. There was this primary building. That's the one that burned down years later. Okay. We walked, Marion and I walked to school. Okay. Anyway, we walked up to the door, and she leads me by the hand and takes me in there. And here you are. I mean, there I stood like an idiot. I mean, she didn't really just say, "Here, teacher, here's this kid." She just pushed me in there.
Welcome to school.
Yeah, that's about right. And so I got in with the. At that time, there were two first grades, two second grades. I got into grade B because of my initial. Anything between A and L was in the first group, and the rest were in the second. And since mine was W, I was in the second group. So anyway, I had Miss Keeney as a teacher.
Okay. So tell us about your clothing as a kid. Did almost sew all of that, or?
Mostly she sewed, and I said, and it was just like you talk about this coat of many colors that the song, the one that sings.
Dolly
Parton, with her coat of many colors. Well, I didn't have a coat of many colors, but Mom did make me a coat out of one of hers, because during the Depression, you couldn't buy material in town. I mean, there wasn't any. And she made me a coat out of one of hers. And on top of that, down below where we lived, there was a feed store. So anyway, we bought the chicken feed down there, and I'm sure she bought flour and whatever else was that they had available. She bought there. And anyway, the sacks were printed material. And she used that printed material from those feed sacks and cotton sacks to make us dresses.
Oh.
So talk to us about the Depression. What are some of your memories of that? Like
personally, I mean, I was aware that there was, I guess, something going on, but as far as the drastic things, I don't ever remember there being any places where they were feeding people. You know, like they show some places where they were feeding these in lines where they were feeding people. I don't ever remember anything like that.
So food was scarce, but not soup kitchens.
Right. That's right. And my father got his check from Central Power and Light, but he had to go to Comfort to cash it because our banks were closed.
Oh.
They closed all the banks in town.
Oh, my.
Yeah.
Well, and at that time, what kind of car did y'all have? Or
we had Model A Ford, I think is what you call them. Okay. It was sort of a boxy. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So traveling all the way to Comfort in a Model A. And
well, whatever he drove, he went down there to cash his check.
Oh, goodness.
Probably got $100 a month. But anyway, I said we never suffered as far as food or anything like. We were not aware of that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. But I said they managed beautifully as far as they were. Like I say, it didn't touch, you know, in ways like some people talk about it. I guess the banking was the worst. I mean, I don't know if you're aware, but there were several of the local bankers who committed suicide because of the banks closing.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
But school went on as normal during the Depression.
Yeah. Other than that, and as time went on, and the war started in, and all of this, that it just, everything just really changed. And see, by that time, in 1941, when that happened, I was a freshman in high school. That's as far as I had gotten.
Okay.
And at what point did German stop being the normal language and being more scarce? I'm not sure how to say that right, but
it came out during World War II. German was still spoken all around in town, but there was a point when, in the churches, where they would start preaching in English instead of German. Everything was still German. See, now when I went to confirmation, I took that in German. And I've always regretted that because I always said, I wish I could have taken that in English. To be able to understand it better.
Mm-hmm.
German, the Bible in the German is hard to understand.
Really? That's
Yeah.
Interesting.
Sorry.
But it was at some point where they acted like, you speak German, you're out of it. But they did, some of the churches, they did start having the English service. But, so, these are just little odds and ends of things that,
Yeah. So, okay, you're growing up in the Depression and then teenager there when the war started.
yes.
With the war going on, what did you do for entertainment back in the, did you go to the movies?
Once
radio?
in a while you went to a movie, not often. I was telling Jeannie, it just seems to me like either I must have been in middle school that they allowed us to leave school to go see Gone with the Wind at the movie theater. And I said, I know I saw it, but it seems to me like they allowed us to leave school to actually come and see it.
Wow.
That was a big movie of the time.
Oh, yes.
Huge. What other movies do you remember growing up?
Well,
Anything?
not so much with growing up. Sound of Music later on,
Mm-hmm.
but I guess maybe a cartoon here and there, that you thought was funny. And
Yeah.
Dad was asking us last night if when we went to school, when we were going to school, it was called the Snack Shack, but there's a little building right next to the school. Was that open? And
oh, yes.
Was that a big place to go?
Yes. We ate there many times. That was the school side lunchroom.
Okay.
It was there. And on top of that, your Wally's buddy's mother was the one that was running that. Their name was Seelig. Anyway, he was one of Wally's good buddies. And his sister and his mother worked in that thing, and they were the ones that put it up. And I imagine they built that for this woman to make a living, because she sold hamburgers and let me see, what do you call can't think. It's a filled noodles, a soup. She fixed those in there, but there were hamburgers and that kind of stuff that she dished out that you could buy.
Well, that sounds much better than what it was when we were there. We could get maybe like Snickers bars and Skittles and pickles.
Yeah, there wasn't a lot of that kind of stuff at all at that time that they had. But anyway, they had that. And then, of course, after she was gone, then I don't remember who and anybody that ran it after that. Because they were there the whole time, the Seelig family. They operated it, I think, all the time I went to school. But anyway, it was real neat. And of course, they had drinks that you could get. But I said, and it was not often. I said, if your mother I took a lunch to school every day. We didn't have a lunchroom. I mean, Mom made us sandwiches, and we took them to school in a sack. And we sat outside in the yard and ate them.
Are there any other restaurants that was real popular in town that you ever went to?
I can't even recall, Jill. We just didn't go.
So you probably didn't go to
We just didn't go to a lot. I mean, but and as far as going to, I mean, nowadays I see these school kids leaving school and going to the pizza place and all this. And I said, that wasn't done in those days. I mean, if we went anywhere, it was a school side lunchroom. And I said, if Mom gave us 15 cents, we could go buy a hamburger.
Oh, man.
I mean, it was pretty reasonable.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And then when I was in high school, they finally put a lunchroom in the old primary building in the basement. And that was later, like I say, when I was in high school. Okay. There was no actual lunchroom as such.
Well, so, as we both started our families with all the kids and Santa and everything, tell us about, like, your Christmas traditions. Like, as a kid, what do you remember growing up? How did your family do Christmas?
Well, I said a Christmas tree was put up in the living room, and we had French doors between the living room and dining room. And those doors were closed. And then on Christmas Eve, anyway, it was, I guess Mom, a lot of times she put a sheet inside so we couldn't see what was put in there. But anyway, they would open it up and we would go in and have it. But before we would go in, she always had, I don't know whether we had dried meat or sausage. But anyway, she would make, we would have a certain meal that we would eat that night at supper. And she may have already made some fruit cake or something that we would eat. But then like I say, we would go in and we would go have our gifts. And I said, and it's just like many times I just tell Jeannie, or I said, well, I know when I was growing up, I might have gotten a couple of pair of socks as gifts and maybe a few doll clothes for my doll from the year before. She might have sewed me some doll clothes. It wasn't a lot of toys and stuff.
Yeah.
Did you guys do Saint Nick?
No, not really. The worst part that I could remember was we had off from school, and that meant house cleaning time. Wash the windows. And my grandparents, of course, lived here, the Wilkie grandparents. Now, the other grandparents were, now my grandmother on my mother's side had died when my mother was only like 14. So I never knew her. But my grandfather, he would come once in a while. I mean, he was sort of he never really was settled anywhere. He usually came and lived with kids once. He'd live with somebody here and then there. But anyway, he passed away in 36 already. So anyway, those were the only grandparents that I knew, was my Wilkie grandparents. And generally during the Christmas holidays, we always went to their house. We went to each one of the aunts to visit with them. Those local, we didn't go to San Antonio especially to visit with that aunt, and that was about the only. I did have aunts up in Fort Worth, but we never went up there.
I know, you took some big trips later on in life, but was there any big family trips or vacations there, or was there such a thing?
One time when my dad had a convention with Central Power and Light in Corpus, and my aunt was living in Corpus at that time, that we got to go along on that trip. And that's one of the very few trips that I can recall. We went to Corpus.
Okay.
We didn't make a lot of trips.
No.
I bet that was a fun trip, though.
Yeah.
You were very excited.
Let's see. Anything in particular about Thanksgiving or Easter?
Not really. Of course, Easter, we always had the Easter egg hunt at the house. But other than that, I mean, it was nothing really out of the ordinary, I don't guess.
Okay. Is there anything you had wished you asked your mother?
Pardon?
Are there any stories that you wish you had asked your mother about?
Or just any questions that you wish that you had been able to ask?
I said there's more that I'd like to ask her now that I did at that time.
Well, what would you have wanted to ask her now?
If she remembered a certain party in the family, basically. And it's too late for that.
Okay. Well, can you tell us how you met Opie and what dates were like?
Okay. After I started to work, I also walked to work. So one evening, I was working from work. I was walking home. And anyway, he was working at the peanut company at that time, which was in that old gin area. He was working there. And he came by and he stopped and asked if I wanted to ride. That was a pickup. So he picked me up and took me home. And then it evolved from that. He, of course, asked me for a date. And anyway, and it was 6 weeks later, I guess we got married.
Oh, I didn't realize it was that quick.
Oh, yeah.
Where was your first date?
Where?
Yeah.
Probably to a movie.
Okay.
Nothing. And your grandfather never danced. So we never went to a dance. That dancing was not his sport.
Okay. Well, so you got married 6 weeks later.
Just about that. Yeah, we got married June 28th, 1947.
Okay. And then, so when did you get the house that you're in now?
The house now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. When we were first married, we lived with my folks in our old bedroom is where we were. Okay. And then after that, we rented an apartment that was right behind Holy Ghost Church. There was a house there. There was an apartment upstairs. We rented that. And then after that, when we decided maybe we would do something as far as a house of our own, we moved in with Wally's mother in her house. And then Wally was working at the fire station already at that point. Okay. Then they were going to build the new fire station. And so they went down to Bastrop and they bought a barracks that they set over there behind where the security drive-in bank is. They bought this barracks and they set it there. And that's where they put the fire trucks during that time. And the firemen were over there in that building. And until it was, so then when it was finished, when the fire station was finished, my dad bought that barracks and gave it to us. And Wally and I went there after work every evening and we tore the thing down. We dismantled it, loaded it up, took it over to, and Wally had bought that lot over there where the house is now. He paid $700 for those 2 lots. Wow. And you know what they're valued at the appraisal now? $70,000.
That's quite a return on investment right there.
Awesome. Is that 1,000 or 10,000?
Yeah.
Oh my.
Anyhow, he and I tore the thing down, and then we hired a carpenter. And originally, I have pictures of it if you ever want to see them. I mean, I've got them somewhere. We built this original house that was only what's now my dining room, the kitchen, and the back bedroom, and the bathroom, and the garage. It was just that portion. We had a house plan that we wanted, but we could only afford that first portion. So that's what we built. So anyway, before we finally finished the whole thing, we had Paul and we had Carol. In my bedroom, I had a baby bed on each side of my bed.
Whew.
Oh,
I was wondering where they were sleeping. Whew.
Yeah, that's where they were. And I said, luckily, I had I got an old bed that my folks had, that we had, and then next, Wally's brother and his wife lived next door to us when we first lived there. And anyway, they were finished with a baby bed, and so they loaned us their baby bed for the other one. So anyway, that's where we had Paul and Carol. And Wally was working at the fire station and working days one week, nights the next week. It was back and forth. And so the days when he was working days, during that time, he had to sleep, and he built a playpen, which I still have, if anybody's ever interested in having it. He built me a playpen, and I put it in the dining room, and that's where I put Carol during the day.
So how was Dad as a baby? Did he cry a lot?
Well, not really. He was pretty good. His biggest problem was he crawled everywhere.
Sounds right.
I do hear once they're mobile, it's all bets are off.
We had a big, when we were first living there, the city had put a post in the back, I guess for the electric or whatever it was. I can't remember. But getting back to the house, it was not until 1954 that we finished the house the way it is now. Mm. Anyway, it was finished then, and then we had Carol Jeannie and David after that. But anyway, this post was there, and so the city removed that post. So there was a hole. And Wally came up with this cottonwood tree. He planted in there, in that hole. Okay? And that tree got to be a pretty good sized tree. It was back there, over there by the garage. Well, anyway, after, I don't know whether it was during the time we were building the house, the last of it. Well, anyway, Paul crawled up into that tree, up to the top. I mean, it was pretty good size by that time. He crawled up in there, and anyway, there was a little lady living on the corner over there. Anyway, she comes running over there to tell me that Paul's in that tree. And I said, Frida, he crawled up there. He's going to have to come down by himself.
Well, obviously he made it down.
He made it down. and that playpen I was talking about, he used it too. But he came and he had that leg slung over the side and he was out of that thing.
Oh, good.
I mean, he loved to crawl everywhere.
Always on an adventure, it sounds like.
And I said, and one of the best things, when he was going to school, okay, now if somebody, I mean, I don't know what particular items it would be, but if somebody in the class might have either misplaced something or lost something, I mean, he didn't have any problem getting it.